Hey everyone, Riddle here. Thank you for coming to my channel, or thank you for coming back if you're a subscriber. I really appreciate it. So, what is he working on this morning in the kitchen? It's harvest time, and I want to say I overplanted, but this is what truly happened. There's a handful of people who live on my property, and initially all of these people said that they were very interested in gardening and helping to garden and to plant the garden and to harvest the garden. But then when the actual work came into it, everyone disappeared. Which left me with a huge amount of work to follow through with because I'm not a quitter. And part of that project was 70 different heirloom tomato plants. So now I'm picking about a bushel a day, I want to say, or more, and I need to do something with them. So everything's being turned into a sauce, or it's getting dehydrated, or it's becoming chips. And today what I'm making is sun-dried tomatoes. And just because it's called sun-dried doesn't mean you have to dry it in the sun, though next year, because I have such a volume of fruit and vegetables, I'm probably going to build a large solar dehydrator because we definitely have the sun to support it, and often I'll dry my herbs in the car. So we don't have a Tesla. That being said, let me show you what's going on here. So I found through trial and error, the most important part of sun-dried tomatoes is really keeping an eye on them, because you don't want them to be too dry and you don't want them to be too moist. And finding that honey spot is really tricky, really tricky. Even cutting them 1/8 of an inch, they were drying out too much. So I'm going with a pretty thick cut here. What they suggest online or in videos, like if you have a cherry tomato, you'd literally just cut that cherry tomato in half. So about that width or thicker. I'm finding that even those little cherry tomatoes I had trouble keeping an eye on, and they dried out a little too much for me. So you have different options. You can use a dehydrator. You can use your oven. My oven is a Fancy Nancy oven, and it actually has a dehydrator setting. You can see I've got all these beautiful tomatoes lined up in here. These are all paste tomatoes except for the little Wappa peaches there. And then I've got my black tomatoes, my black beauties, and black Japanese trifle. And what is that on the top? Well, I don't waste my herbs. I grow herbs because I love herbs. And every time they start to flower or they get a little overgrown, I diligently cut them back and dehydrate those seasonings on a lower setting. The thing with seasonings, if you put them in the sun and dry them, or you dry them at 160 degrees or even 140 degrees sometimes, it kills the essence and also turns them brown. So if you're going to dehydrate herbs, if you do them in your car, make sure they're covered up from the sun. If you do them in a dehydrator, keep them around 120 to 130 degrees if you really want to keep the beautiful green color. And I use not just your traditional Italian herbs to make my legendary herb mix. You have to understand, well, first of all, the reason spices are so expensive is it takes so many spices to make a little jar of mixed Italian spice. So much effort, so much water, so much time to get that precious little bottle of spice. And it's worth every penny. That being said, when you buy that little bottle of spice, you don't know where those herbs came from, you don't know how old they are. And I'm telling you, the ones you grow yourself and dehydrate and grind up are going to be so far superior in flavor, in aroma. I mean, people go nuts when I give them a little jar or a little baggie of my Italian spice. So fresh, so homemade, and also very medicinal. If you don't already know, back in the medieval times, people used common spices like thyme and oregano and what have you for different ailments. And now science can back up that there are a lot of amazing antibacterial and anti-cancer and nutrition in even the most common of kitchen herbs. So if you grow them organically and you dry them on a lower setting, you're going to have all the benefits of not just the flavor, but you're going to have the benefits of the health benefits. And some people just like to sun dry their tomatoes with no flavor whatsoever. I'm not adding salt to these at all because they'll probably be used in different culinary dishes. And I always like to leave things low to no salt and have the option to salt it later, because you never know what you're making. It may already have like sardines or olives or cheese or something in it, and then you're going to have too high a sodium content and it's going to be oversalted. So you're going to ask, how long do you dehydrate these? Well, you really have to keep an eye on them. Completely depends on where you live, the humidity, the temperature outside. I'm not going to tell you an exact time. I would say start at 8 to 12 hours, and then check them. Now, once they've become leathery, then you gently fill a jar. This is a larger jar because this is for my use, with the actual tomatoes, and press them down gently, but don't overpack them. And then just fill that with a really good olive oil, a really good grade of olive oil, organic if you can afford it or have access to it. Then I put a regular lid on it. If you're going to can and store things, these reusable canning lids, you can get them from Amazon, are brilliant. And the price has really come down on these. You can get a dozen or more of these on Amazon for under $10. And a lot of times, if you put the regular canning lids back on after you've opened them, you know how it gets all cruddy and gross inside, and the jelly, jams, whatever you've canned gets contaminated because that's not airtight. The regular canning lid with the sealer inside. So I tell everybody that I share a lot of canning goods with now to invest in these lids, because I'm not going to give them to them. It's enough. I'm just giving them so many jars of my hard work and love. So you filled it with olive oil, and then from here, I put it in the refrigerator. Better safe than sorry. In regards to cleaning your jar, I always think that you cannot over clean things. Before I add the tomatoes and the oil, I take just plain old vinegar from Costco. You can get this for a couple dollars a gallon. This is also brilliant for washing hardwood floors. My sister has a hardwood flooring company, and she said, no, don't use any of that fancy stuff. It's unnecessary. Use a little bit of dish soap and a little bit of vinegar in some water, and boy, your hardwood floors will look beautiful. And talk about inexpensive. So I'm going to take some of this, put enough to cover the bottom of your jar that you can actually shake it up. Shake your jar really well. Make sure you get it in the lid and the crevice of the lid, and then give it a couple minutes and then pour it out. And that is as effective as bleach in regards to killing off the cooties. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to take this. I'm trying to figure out if I can some of these actually. And I think it's pretty simple, but I need to do the research. That would entail putting a canning lid on this. And then after I did the canning lid, I would throw it in the steamer oven so it would get nice and hot and seal it. But I'm not sure yet. I need to do more research on that. I mean, I know they do it because they do it at the stores. But I'm kind of having problems with sometimes when you get the extra heat, if you use the canning method, even if you're using a canning kettle, it gets too hot and it keeps destroying the pectin in my jellies. It's like perfect. It's starting to gel. And then I'm only doing like 10, 15 minutes and it's getting too hot and it's turning the jelly to, you know, back to this liquidy form, which is a real drag. Oh, by the way, this flavor of this is insane. We had a bunch of honeydew melons and cantaloupes and some other funky melons, some vine peaches, which is actually a melon. And I'm like, wonder if you can make jam from those. I've never heard of cantaloupe or melon jelly. So I ground them up and added my sugar, a little citric acid, the pectin, and the flavor is outstanding. It's just amazing. Back to our dehydrated tomatoes. Look at these beauties. These are pink Mexican ribbed heirloom tomatoes. I've had these seeds for decades. These are black beauties, but I think they hybridized with one of my pink tomatoes because they actually turned out this beautiful shade of dark purple this year with this pink inside. And last year they were scarlet red inside and black. So I've got a new kind of tomato that I'm naming the purple one. When you slice down your tomatoes, I think it's kind of good to just take the tops right off where the thick core is. Take it down far enough that you're not going to get that, you know, the tough core at the top of the tomato. And you're going to have a nice flat tomato to work with. And if you're working with the end of the tomato, you have two choices. You can take the gamble of just putting that end, but the dehydrator, the warm air, isn't going to be able to really circulate through there. So you might have a softer, mushier tomato that's not going to be consistent with the rest of your tomatoes. So what I do is I take a thin slice of this bottom piece off and then cut it the same width as my other tomatoes. And with the spice, everything's gonna go down, you know, it's gonna shrink down. So just a nice little sprinkling that it really covers the tomato and is gonna add, you know, it's not dependent on this for flavor at all. We're just giving it a special edge and what I like to say, bumping up its nutritional profile. What does that mean? I kind of made that up. I'm sure they have another name for it, but when I make things, I imagine like a survival situation that I would have to derive as much nutrition, protein, vitamins from whatever it is that I'm preserving. So the other day, I was making verde sauce. That's a green salsa. It's made from tomatillos. So what I did, I had a bunch of ground cherries, which have a really high nutrition profile, and I had my tomatillos, which are okay. They're you know, they're nutritious, but they weren't super ripe. The ground cherries helped to sweeten that up and round off the lack of maturity in the tomatillos. But then I did an experiment because you know how more and more people are learning the different weeds you can eat. So I really got into purslane this year. Purslane is an amazing weed. You can stir fry it. You can cook it in eggs. It's a very traditional Mexican dish. You can. I pickled it, and everybody I gave that pickled purslane to just went crazy for it. Like they literally asked for more. That's when you know people aren't just buttering you up. So I took the purslane, cleaned it up well, and ground it up into a nice green paste and added that to the verde sauce. Because the thing about the purslane, it has this slight vegetable citrus flavor, which is really similar to a ripe tomatillo. And so now I've got this really deep green sauce with a much higher nutritional profile that tastes like verde, but it just has that little secret ingredient that no one else uses. No one else to my knowledge, but my friends call me the kitchen witch, and that's because I'm a terrible baker, because I'm terrible at following instructions, but I'm a wonderful cook, and I'm an excellent inventor and originator. So put down in the comments, how heavy was your biggest tomato this year? My friend and I have a little competition going. Mine was 1.77 grams, which is almost 2 pounds. I can show you a picture of that later. But I'm really working on getting a 2 pound tomato. That's my ego, my fantasy. Also, this is kind of real. I got a lot of these weird mutant tomatoes. You know when you get one that looks like it has a wiener or a nose? Check this out. How insane is that? And I didn't get just one, I got quite a few. But if you noticed, it favored this particular variety of tomato. So I looked it up. You know, the thing is, if you see something you don't understand, if you hear a word that you don't, a vocabulary word that you don't know what it means, don't be lazy. You have this phone in your hand that contains almost all the world's knowledge. Google it. Expand your mind. Expand your knowledge. You know, don't get brainwashed into thinking that your education ends in a formal educational system in high school or in college, because really you spend a lifetime learning if you're smart, and it'll keep your brain from atrophying. Atrophying? Look, I'm still learning vocabulary, I told you. That being said, I looked this up. Why does this? And it was interesting. It said it could be due to extreme heat, which we did have. It could be due to a genetic issue when the cells are splitting, just like what happens in animals. I'm putting my bet on the extreme heat because I planted the tomatoes this year along the driveway. And even though I kept them watered, we still had this thermal dynamic going on because of the asphalt being right against the soil. So it doesn't matter how much you water if the soil temperature is still being affected by the extreme temperatures of that asphalt. Well, there you go. And I think that's what caused these mutations. But what I'm really curious to see is if next year I take the seeds from this tomato and plant them in a different spot, if it has changed the genetics of the tomato and I will have mutant tomatoes, or if that was just an environmental thing. So I'll let you know next year, because I'm going to label these mutant, but they're still getting eaten. All right, boys and girls, I'm going to let you go. This was one of my almost 2 pound tomatoes. You know where I got this tomato from, the seeds for this? And I'm talking, this was probably 20 years ago. So in Los Angeles, there's a huge Armenian community. And we lived in this little neighborhood on the edge of Hollywood. And that's where a lot of decades ago, it was one of the first Armenian communities in between Hollywood and Silver Lake and right on the edge of Los Feliz. And the cool thing about the Armenians is they're still very old world in a lot of the things that they do. And amazing food, amazing food. And you'd go into the little corner market, and instead of it being filled with garbage, like most American corner markets, it was full of all this produce that was actually grown by all the old Armenians. And instead of them, just letting it rot, or they made like a little business out of it, and they would take it to the little markets and they would put it out and sell the most amazing fresh produce that was being grown by these elders in their backyard, which I thought was, why isn't this happening everywhere? Why? What's wrong? But anyways, they're doing it. That's all that matters. And there were these giant red tomatoes with super thin skins. And I was so blown away. I didn't know what that tomato was, but I knew I had to have it. And I saved the seeds and I named it Big Red. And this is Big Red. And Big Red made some big ass red tomatoes. The other tomato, heirloom tomato, if you want huge tomatoes, if you like big tomatoes, is the Anis Noir. It's a strange, this was the one that was almost 2 pounds. It's a very strange colored tomato, but they get giant, enormous, and a huge yield, huge yield. I'd say the third giant tomato that I would push is the pink oxheart. And it literally makes like heart-shaped tomatoes, round and heart-shaped, and they're giant. and they're very dense, so it makes an excellent, it's a very sweet tomato, and it makes a great paste tomato, because there's a difference between regular tomatoes and paste tomatoes, and that is the paste tomatoes have less water in them. They're more dense, which makes them, of course, easier to turn into sauce, because you don't have to cook them as long to, get the extra moisture out of them. All right. Thank you for giving me 20 some odd minutes of your time. I want you to take care of yourselves and take care of each other, because I believe how we treat each other in the streets is our ultimate reality. If you like my videos, quick money-saving tips, garden wisdom, rants, raves, art, and occasional magic, please subscribe. It helps. And guess what? I have some books coming out soon. They're not about gardening yet, but they're still really clever, and I will be sharing that with you very, very soon. And that's my cliffhanger. Bye.